Welcome everyone. You've put a bit pressure on me, but I will try. So this work we are going to talk about some of the works we have been doing for the last more than 2 years now with Department of Water on testing or assessing some impact of the water reduction allocation strategies they were thinking. So this is part of like the economic consequences and how, and hopefully these results will be useful to them. And our preliminary discussion is so far is that actually they are very enthusiastic and positive about these results. Anyway, so here we are, as probably already know, that in many parts of the world, groundwater is under significant pressure from various regions, including over-extraction, increasing demand due to population pressure and climate change. So in many places, the water regulatory authorities are under increasing pressure to manage these system or resources more sustainably. There are main two ways it is possible to reduce the pressure. One is to reduce the volume of water extracted from the system by increasing the price of water extracted or by directly adjusting the water license allocation. However, price-based approaches could be useful if there is a clear, well-established market. But in many cases, there isn't, and that's why often the regulatory authorities have to go for more direct allocation reduction. It could be administratively feasible as well as more politically interesting, but it could be challenging at the same time, particularly with respect to our equity consideration, where if the water extraction has to be reduced, like the equity consideration suggests that it has to be reduced based on some principle or some basis which would reduce the amount of water equally or equitably. So that could be either a fixed quantity from each license users, or it could be either based on a fixed proportion of water percentage of reduction. But we probably know already that there is substantial heterogeneity among the license users in terms of their economic yield or return, and the marginal value of water use would be different across these license holders. So then the question would be that this homogeneous cut or homogeneous reduction in water allocation, how that would influence their overall economic outcome. And so that's why it's possible that in many cases this allocation would not be economically efficient. So therefore, the economic efficiency consideration will suggest that minimizing the total economic loss, and in practice, this would mean that cuts should be suffered more by the producers who have lower marginal values of water. And this would in turn suggest that the water regulators have a trade-off between efficiency and equity. In one case, we want to be fair to everybody, every license user. On the other hand, we want to reduce the total economic loss from our reduction. This efficiency equity trade-off has been explored in various contexts by various authors in different countries. However, it has not been explored that much in the context of groundwater allocation, resource allocation, particularly in Australia. Especially like people have spoken about it, but more from theoretical perspective, like, okay, what kind of equities could be applicable or how the society could prefer, but not looking at the distributional impact that much. To contribute to this knowledge gap, we looked at the economic assessment for Gnangara groundwater system, management system in Western Australia. And so there are two purposes. One was that, well, mainly is because we wanted to do it with Department of Water, and we got licenses and information about license and other information. So, and also this system is also very important for Western Australia in particular, but also for Australia as well. So the two main questions or aims that we wanted to study in this, particularly in this presentation, is that what is the overall impact of a uniform water allocation reduction? And secondly, what are the distributional impacts of a uniform water allocation reduction? So a little bit about Gnangara groundwater system. This system is vitally important for Western Australia, as more than 60% of Perth's public water is coming from the system. It extends over more than 2,000 square kilometers. It supports many native vegetations, ecosystems, native flora and fauna, and unique ecosystems as well. It also supports an extensive region of agriculture, irrigated agriculture. The annual value of water from coming out of the system, according to Marsden and Jacobs, is around 6.7 billion Australian dollar. However, the system is under increasing pressure, according to a relatively old report now by the Department of Water, 2009. Out of 51 groundwater sub-areas, 51% area had no water available for new allocation or new licenses. 41% area had limited water to allow new licenses, and only 8% had water available for new licenses. So, and the system is under increasing pressure for various reasons, including climate change, population growth, reduced rainfall, and increased water abstraction. So from our analysis of water decline from 1979 to 2014 for 218 monitoring sites, we estimated that around over these last 25 years, around 2 meters, the groundwater level has fallen by around 2 meters. And on annual basis, it's around 6 centimeters per year. So, and the system, the decline in the system or the pressure on the system has been more or less uniform, as well as the pressure continues. So, if we, if we look at the minimum water level, so this is the manual Australian height. So you can look, especially focus on this blue area because this is more visible color, I think. But you could see, and this is also the highest MASD, so this is the last one here. You could see from 84, 99, and then 2014. So it has reduced, and but the other colors also have moved. So it's not that only the blue ones, only those areas were affected. So the pressure on the system has been more or less uniform. So how do we tackle this thing? Like obviously, as I was saying, that the department are obviously quite aware of this problem, and they are thinking of different allocation strategy to manage this problem. So in collaboration with them, we thought that okay, maybe we tackle a small part of this problem where we only look at horticulture industry and see how we can assess the impact of their management strategies. So we picked up an individual-based modeling approach, which allowed us to be sensitive to the different farm sizes as well as initial water allocation and farming practices. So our individual-based model represents a population of farm irrigators, particularly horticulturists, who are the second largest consumer of water after public water supply in Western Australia, and particularly focus on horticulture industry to keep the model tractable. So we collected data from individual licenses from Department of Water. From those information, we had this the amount of water they requested and the amount of water allocated, as well as the area they wanted to use that water for. So there are various classifications like horticulture and nursery. There are other uses as well. So we looked at only those licenses which had a component of horticulture and nursery use, and we looked at only those licenses which were active in 2014. Okay, so that's our binding, and then in total we got around 663 individual licenses. So use these information of these licenses to do our follow-up assessment. So and we are also, in terms of our methodology, also assume that each of these unique licenses represent a farm. So that's a caveat in our study, I would say, but still it's a reasonable approximation given the expert consultations that we had. So out of these licenses or farms, now I've started calling them farms, 98% of these licenses had a smaller than 20 hectares of land area allocated to nursery and horticulture. And also 98% of the farm had less than 250 megaliter of water allocation. But there is a strong positive correlation, almost 0.9 to 1, between this farm, between the area they wanted to cultivate it and the amount of water they were allocated. So in another way to look at the same farm profiles is in terms of distribution of their of the farm, as well as in terms of area and water. So you could see that there is so if you look at this line here, it will say that the 80% cumulative. So if you look at here, which is 80% of the farms had around 20% of both water as well as area allocated. So, and then the rest 20% had the rest of the area as well as water allocated. So we can also look at the water allocated per hectare, which is more egalitarian in sense it's closer to the straight line here, and so this would be the green line here. And it is, in terms of water per hectare, the allocation was more equitable from egalitarian perspective. So then, well, the Gini coefficients also show the same story, but this graph showing the visually, and this is through numbers. So for each of these licenses we have, so first of all we developed a generic optimization model based on Gao et al. 2013, where each farm could grow a mix of vegetables. So we picked 5 vegetables: cauliflower, broccoli, lettuce, beans, and tomato. These vegetables constitute more than around 40% of the total yield from the region. So each farm could pick from any of these vegetables or could cultivate a mix, a combination of these vegetables. So I'm not going to go into the details of the data, but these were the main data that went into the model, like farm gate price. So these are for individual vegetable specific information: irrigation water per hectare, farm gate price, price range or some variation in the price, yield, which is ton per hectare, cost of production, and then the land use proportion is something that we used as a constraint, which I will tell you afterwards. And then the last one, the gross return per megaliter, is also something that we checked for our calibration of our model. So the first these variables went into the model. So this was in terms of vegetables. Also we considered in terms of irrigation technologies, where we considered 6 technologies that the farm or the model could choose from, and so but the technologies varied in terms of their efficiency and cost. So you could clearly see that there are, other than the first one, the more or less they are similarly efficient, but the price changes, and this make the model would pick the one which probably would provide become more efficient, at the same time less costly. So it would pick up that one, but in some cases, depending on water restrictions, it would switch from one technology to another. So the objective of the model was to maximize the total net revenues from cropping, subject to a set of water allocation and area constraints. So the water allocation constraint is the obvious one, that the total amount of water applied or used to the area cannot exceed the water available under a license. And in terms of area constraint, first one is that the total area cultivated cannot exceed the farm area under individual licenses, as well as we have broken down the crops into two major groups, winter and summer, and we said that okay, it cannot exceed the available area for each specific crops. So then we also implemented another area constraint, which was the overall or regional land area constraint, where we looked at the existing proportion of area under each of these vegetables, and in the regional model we set that as a constraint. So in a sense that we used 2 different approaches in the modeling. First, we looked at the total area and the total water available out of the 663 licenses, and we aggregated them together, and then that would gave us a regional farm profile, but without going into the details of the variations and other things. But so this is with the regional model, it's a single. You can treat it as a single farm, where the total area constraint and the water availability constraints are some aggregation of the individual licenses. Okay, so aggregated, and the whole region. So the reason why we did this is, first of all, to test some of the understand the overall impact which could happen if we treat this whole thing as a uniform set without looking at the variation between farms. And the secondly is that the land use proportions were available at a regional scale, so we wanted to implement that to see whether that made any difference or not. So for both these 2 purposes, we wanted to test with a regional model first, And then we treated each of these licenses as a single farm, and we ran the same optimization for individual farms, where each farm would pick up their specific land and area constraints. Am I making sense without using any equations? Yeah? Okay, great. So this individual farm model allows to determine the distribution of impact across farms with different sizes as well as water allocations. So with the regional model, we considered 4 scenarios: base case with water restriction, base case with area restriction. Base case is the water in terms of water allocation always. So in this scenario, we assume that there is no reduction in water allocation, or we use the original allocation. However, the cropped area under each vegetable cannot exceed a specified level or proportion, and the level is based on the current cropping area proportion that we found from existing literature. And then the second scenario is base case without area restriction, where still original water allocation, aggregated water allocation, but there is no maximum area restriction under each vegetable. Then the third case was reduced area allocation case with area restriction, where we reduced the original allocation by 25%, and there is a restriction on the maximum cropping area. So I should justify that the 25% was something that Department of Water was interested in testing the impact. So we used this number as a given from the agency, and so we wanted to test that. And the fourth one is that original allocation reduced by 25%, but we did not impose any area restriction. So these were for our regional model. With the farm model, we only looked at base case without area restriction, as well as reduced allocation without area restriction. Because here we are more interested in terms of like what would be the optimal combination of mix given a constraint for individual farm. Okay, so with the regional model, we ran each scenario for 10,000 times, and then we look for our calibration or whether our model is working or not. We looked at the gross margin return, a gross return estimated from Hoffman, and we adjusted that, and we looked at what we are getting from our model in terms of total revenue per megaliter of used water. So this is the distribution that we got for our base case with area restriction. So that would be most close to what we know about the system. So there are limitations of like how much, or there are proportionate of like the area they cultivated under each crop, because for various reasons they do not always allocate the whole area to under the most productive crop. Okay, so there could be legacy, there could be other limitations as well. So that's why we thought that this would be the most realistic in terms of current existing land use proportion and with the current water allocation level. So these 2 bars are coming from Hoffman, and it's the average adjusted gross returns and for these 5 crops, and you could see that it's sitting more or less nicely given the range. So some results. Now, first of all, from the regional model, when we don't consider any area restriction or we don't impose that restriction, the change in total revenue per hectare or loss is 23%, as well as for the net revenue, the loss is 22%. With the current area restriction or proportionate restriction, the loss is around 12% and 14% for this. So one thing to take away from here is that area restriction would be something where the model is not running it optimally because of this artificial restriction in terms of maximum cropping area under each vegetable. So when we allow the model to run optimally, the loss is higher, but you could also see the net revenue and the total revenue and the net revenue are much higher when we don't impose this area restriction. So, but on the other hand, with existing restriction, the impact is much less in terms of proportionate term, and it's around 12%. So if you remember that the proportionate cut was 25%, and what we are seeing here is the reduction in the gross and net revenue per hectare. So how the model is adjusting that? So this would be our base case. That means the area restriction and with current water allocation. So the restrictions would be in terms of like maximum area it could cultivate under each crop. So here tomato, I'll go only the purple one, the tomato. So you could see that the model could not cultivate more than this proportion. When we reduced our water allocation, still it maintained that proportion of tomato, but it got rid of bean because it moved from some less productive or less profitable vegetables. Yeah.
Does that violate sort of usual rotational constraint for tomatoes? And the other thing is, would it have a price effect as well? Given that this is basically supplying Perth and the demand elasticity for tomatoes is probably not that high.
Yeah, we tried to look at that, but essentially we decided to ignore the price elasticity. It's just given a price setting, what's the optimal crop mix? That's what we're getting here. And in terms of rotation, as I was saying, that we consider two seasons, winter and summer. And there's also in terms of fallow area as well, like that went inside the model. That is it could not allow or cultivate. So it has to keep a certain amount of land ready or empty for the next crop. So that's how we tackle this. Yeah. Yeah. So if you look at tomato, still it's growing tomato, but it got rid of bean. But when there was no area restrictions, it is cultivating more of tomato than the others. And it's common for both scenarios of water allocation. So that's how the model is adjusting, or that's what's driving the results. Similarly, in terms of technology use, it's moving away from impact and rotating IR to more of like drip and micro for here and with this one as well. And we are also seeing some uptake of hydroponics here. Okay, so that's the results from our regional model. With the farm model, the setting is the same, except that we did not impose any maximum area restriction for individual farms. Here,
choice of those
irrigation technologies as well as the area under each crop. So it could.
Have you considered the cost for each of those? Have you included that in the model?
So. Yes. So cost of, so let me go a little bit back. So these will determine the profitability or the total benefit of cropping different types of vegetables. And then, but it also has its own cost of production. And then on the top of this, we have for each technology, we have this cost of using different technologies. So the trade-off here is between efficiency and the cost. Yeah. So we can see that if we take the average across all farms, it's the impact, proportionate impact is 13%. So it's not hitting that 25% range. But there is some subtlety which we are hoping to discuss more, which is in terms of distributional impact. So first of all, we wanted to see how this overall reduction in the revenues changes or moved. So first of all, we look at total revenue, and then we plotted 3 lines here. The first, so this is total revenue and this is the distribution of farms, cumulative percentage of farms. And so the green line would be the base case, and then the red line would be the reduced allocation case, and then the blue line would be the change, or if we subtract base case and reduced case, how the distribution would look like. So what we could see is that when it's the change, it's getting more unequal in a sense. You can look at also the Gini coefficient as well here. What it means that the impact is not equivalently distributed across the whole range of farms. Okay, so that's what basically it's telling us. So if you look at, it doesn't matter whether we look at total revenue or net revenue. We can clearly see it's more unequal when you look at the change. relative to our base case or the reduced case. Can also look at the total revenue per hectare. Here it's more clear in terms of the change, how it is being varying. So you can clearly see again that the impact is not compared to our base the total revenue per hectare, the change is more unevenly distributed. Okay, so the Gini coefficients also tell the same story. So then we want to see how the varying, so you remember that we had two main things varying from one license to another license, farm area and water allocation, initial water allocation. So we wanted to see how farm area changing, if we move from a smaller farm to slightly larger farm, how that changes the loss or the change in revenue. So we only looked at net revenue per hectare. Okay. So first let's look at this horizontal line here, where this is coming from the OLS regression model, and this tells us that if we move from if we increase the farm size by 1 hectare, the loss in net revenue would be around 155 or 54 dollar per hectare in net revenue. Okay, so and these would be the 95% confidence interval. But then if we look at in a quantile form, where we look at those farms which have suffered more versus those farms which have suffered less, we can see that the impact is not equally distributed across all the farms. So the farms which had more suffered more is then the changes in farm area actually. So if we go from a smaller, let's say that these are all large farms, so then if we increase the farm size by 1 hectare, the loss will be substantially higher compared to, let's say, if you compare the farms over here, which are located. So which also means that the larger farms, or in this case area, so larger farms will suffer relatively more from this water restriction. Okay. Similarly, because these are strongly positively correlated, so they between area and water allocation, so they are telling us more or less the same story in terms of the impact. And then we look at also in terms of water reduction, which is the amount of water we reduce, because we implemented a 25% reduction, proportionate reduction. So you can think of the farms which had higher initial allocation would have to sacrifice more, because the 25% would constitute more compared to a farm with a smaller amount of initial allocation. So still we are seeing in the similar pattern, where the farms with the smaller initial allocation who also have suffered less actually are going to suffer relatively less compared to the farms with the more allocation. Yeah. Okay, last slide. So the study contributes to our literature on the equity and efficiency trade-offs in natural resource management. We see that apparently equitable strategy of proportionate reduction in allocation could have unequal impact on different groups of farms. And we also have seen that larger farms or farms with more initial water allocation are likely to lose more revenue per hectare. So the efficiency argument would suggest proportionately more reduction of water from farms which already have lower water allocation. But this may or may not be politically feasible, so that's why we also have Ben here from Department of Water. But that's what we are getting out of this analysis. Thank you. Lots of people have helped, and so yeah. Thank you.